And looking at your lesson and thinking back on it, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being the worst lesson you've ever taught, 10 being the best, how would you rank that lesson?
I would say probably around a 7 or 8.
Okay, why do you say that?
The way the digital escape room is set up, I think typically interests kids because it's a game and they're competitive by nature. Even if they're not competitive in sports, all of them want to outdo the other groups. Even if it's just for a candy prize or a couple of bonus points, I think typically escape rooms or games
Right.
are engaging to them. So that pleased me about the lesson, that they are most often engaged, and all of them seem to be at least compliant in their engagement because their teammates are encouraging them to do so. Typically, I require, like on this sheet, if yours was the only handwriting and the only initials on the sheet, then you're the only person getting credit for completing. So everybody has to participate. Everybody's got to be involved.
That's good. That's really good. What would you have changed about this lesson to get it from the 7 to 8 to more of a 9 or 10?
As the students worked, I think that it was easy for them to figure out, because they're familiar with escape rooms, that there's a lock code that they need to work towards. But the way this particular one is designed, and I don't know if you'll be able to pick it up on the video, but for example, in the first lock code, the riddle was this color absorbs heat very well. So choose your color of your clothing carefully. And so it was easy for them to look at the choices and say, oh, well, it's going to be black. Well, they tried to enter black as their code. They didn't realize that if you click on black, it took you to a set of questions that then provided the code to be answered. So I think if I had done a better job of giving them some leading questions, I did give them some hints, but I think they would have been able to take more ownership, and it would have been completely student-led as opposed to teacher-guided, kind of like one of those rides at Dollywood or Disney World where you're driving the car, but you're really not driving by yourself.
Right.
Had that been better explained to them, and I did a better job with those leading questions, I think then it would have been totally student-driven.
Do you feel like they got frustrated in the inquiry process, or did they seem to stay motivated?
I think because it's competitive, they seem to stay motivated. But I do think the fact that it was a little bit nebulous as far as the direction of the escape room, it did produce some frustration. But
tell me more about what you would like to do if you could change. So, like you talked about how you would give a little bit more guiding hints. Do you feel like that's the only thing that really would need to be?
No, I think the way I've set this up, it's on Canvas in their modules, and when they go, then they have some instructions right here for them, and the link is provided. And so it says follow the links and enter the codes to unlock the locks of the escape room. They had to both show me their completed escape room sheet and the congratulations page, but it didn't give them much guidance beyond that. And so I think what I will do for my 2 classes that have to do this tomorrow is I will give them bullet-pointed guidance. Not answers, but look for this, click on this. And so while I think that the escape room by design was a great job by the creator, I think there's some things we could do to easily move it towards a 10 instead of kind of, a B average if I were assessing the escape room and the lesson.
Right. How do you think you would measure that change of if the students got it and that inquiry base?
Well, one reason I did this is we've been typically during the first 2 units, giving them little formative quizzes as we went along every few days to make sure they get it. What I would like to do with this new unit is to give them a pre-quiz, not a whole pre-test, but a pre-quiz to see what they know. So I think, if I had to guess, the groups that will go tomorrow, even though they're ESS groups and they're co-taught, I think that they will do better because the directions will be more clear. And then I'll be able to compare all 3 groups and say which seem to have more mastery of the material, the ones who were given a little bit more guidance or the ones that kind of had to ask more questions and maybe have their momentum interrupted. And I think that I'll be able to tell if it was a valuable tool, if it helps them with their mastery
Right.
of
That's
the concept.
good. And then you have data to support that. So that's really good. Do you want that to be your goal of looking at and seeing if there was an increase?
I think because it's the beginning of the unit, my goal is actually to give them some confidence before we start the unit. Each unit, the way we design our physical science is they set a unit goal themselves. So for some kids, it's I want to increase 10 points on my next quiz. I want to pass my next quiz.
Right.
I want to make sure I finish all my material, stay organized, things like that. So I do want these different lessons to help them meet their own goals. But for us too, I think ultimately we want them to be more fluent with inquiry and to be more confident that they can do it and that they do remember some of this. Because a lot of the units, they won't necessarily have prior knowledge, but with convection, conduction, radiation, even though elementary sometimes doesn't have the time or just doesn't carve out enough time for science, they typically do cover conduction, convection, radiation, heat transfer, holding M&Ms in your hand, things like that. So,
but then that's good about the unit goals, letting the students kind of come up with their own goals. That's really good. You talked about the student goals. What about like your teacher goal for? I know it can vary from unit to unit. What is your overall goal in terms of like embedding like escape rooms and stuff?
I think one of the big things we're doing right now in science across the board, not just us, and state and nationally as well, is emphasizing those engineering practices. And so if we can have them complete an activity like this and then make a claim about something that they learned, back it up with evidence and data, and then come up with a reasoning statement that ties that together, that's also a big part of making sure we're not just doing something fun and then we hop over here and do a lab and keeping everything fragmented, but in allowing them to cohesively look at the whole unit and then give them that confidence, but also give them the content so that they do realize they can master that material. Then I think they're meeting our goals as well.
So you kind of talked about that next step, like doing the CERs and stuff. What do you think you could do, like looking maybe towards the end of the unit, taking the same approach? How could you use a CER for them to build those engineering practices?
I think one thing that we'll do sometimes with starters is give them a question that either previews or reviews. I think if we can possibly start incorporating a question, a claim at the end that allows them to look back and reflect on each of the pieces, like conduction, convection, radiation, specific heat, those different mathematical concepts as well. If we can come up with a claim about heat, that they then were able to look back at the things we've done in class, and that's their evidence, that they back up, here's what we've learned, then I think we're accomplishing our goal. And I think then not only does it matter to us, because it's reliable, it's valid, it's data-driven and supported, but I think it matters to them because then they realize, oh, I didn't think I could do this, but I can do it.
And here's why we did it. That's really good. How effective do you think technology was in your last lesson?
I think it was very effective because they feel like they're so competent with it. And so they don't necessarily ask us as many questions as they may if we were doing a paper pencil thing or just practice problems, but instead giving them something that is second nature to them now, but also making the tie to here's something you're really good at, and oh, by the way, you're learning something while you're playing. I think that's always something that we can kind of use as a hook to get them engaged in the lesson.
Yeah. And my last question, how do you find the line of, letting students inquire something on their own, let them be a little lost and be okay with that, and still letting it be student driven and staying on task?
I think when we have something that always pulls them back, almost like a guide rope. If somebody goes scuba diving, typically there'll be a buoy or a rope that drops down, so they always know,
Mhm.
here's where I go back. I think if we
That's
have the lesson designed around something that has that anchor or that buoy, so they know, oh, here's why we were doing this.
Mhm.
I think a lot of times, if somebody walked in the door and said, what are y'all doing today? Oh, we're doing digital escape room.
Mhm.
Oh, was it fun? Oh, yeah, it's fun. Well, what did you learn? Something about heat. But if they can go back to that, here's conduction, here's convection, here's radiation. Oh, and here's what I learned about why I have to choose my clothing carefully, or here's why I have to eat my M&Ms fast, regardless of their ad campaign. Here's why when I come in from, a snow day and I put my hands on that warm mug, here's why that's helpful to me. If we
Mhm.
can always get them to tie back, I think that's meaningful to them as well. And especially if they did incorporated technology to that, because technology to them is just as much a way of life as textbooks and paper and pencil were to us.
Right. Do you feel, and from my observation, it seems like this is apparent, but do you feel like you let that guide your pacing in your designs of your lesson? Of always trying to tie it back to where they might not understand why they're doing it,
Mhm.
but in the in the big picture.
Yes, I think sometimes with timelines it's tricky because we have a timeline.
Right.
And we have to get X amount covered before their EOC in there. And so when we do that, it's tempting to say, I'm not sure you get that all the way, but we've got to move on.
Right.
But I still think it's important to make sure they get understanding, even if they're not completely mastering it. And if they have understanding, and then on top of that, they have that CER, that ability to think analytically, this much that they have mastered, they can apply that thinking to this much
Mhm.
and possibly able to reason their way to understanding what they need to, or at least proving their
Mhm.
understanding. Even if it's not completely mastery, we've talked about developing, proficient, distinguished, etc. So even if at the end of the year they can't say, hey, look, I'm a distinguished learner.
Right.
They've gone from I'm not doing so well to developing, or developing to proficient.
Right.
Or certainly the proficient kids, we want to move them up to that exemplary stage. So I think even if we can't get everything in because of that timeline you were talking about,
Right.
we take advantage of the time we have and make it as rich as we can, as meaningful as we can.
Mhm.
So then when we're finished, they can apply that knowledge that they do have, process of elimination, or here's what I remember, to what their ultimate goal is.
Right.
Which is being, to me, critical thinkers and successful learners, but obviously as well, that EOC leaders out there as well.
Right. And you're still achieving growth, whether it's proficient level or whatever.
Absolutely.
That's really good. Well, it seems like you are really reflective of that, and that's awesome. And I enjoyed getting to be a part of that. So I appreciate it.